So come on, let's give Monique a massive, massive hand. It's going to be an awesome, awesome night. Come on!
So I just want to thank Pastor Sean and Pastor Dave for allowing me to do this, and it is really a privilege and an honor. I do not take this for granted. So I just want to thank you for trusting that the Lord will speak with me. And so it's wonderful to be with you here tonight. And before I start, I just want to say, you know that song, The Reckless Love of God, where it says, oh, the never-ending reckless love of God, oh, how it chases me down, it fights till I'm found, and it leaves the 99. And this is drenched through the story that I'm going to share tonight. I want to just honor God and say thank you that He is the one who never stops pursuing us. When we are open and able to love Him, and even when there's times where it's difficult to do that He remains faithful. So tonight's topic was actually prompted by Nono, who asked last week or the week before that we should speak about the promises of God, and how I was just the last Friday night of worship week, I was just looking around in church, and I just realized how many people have been touched by so much loss during this time. And I think there are sometimes topics which are a bit difficult to talk about because it's raw and it's emotion and it's sometimes something private, sometimes something that we might feel ashamed of or guilty or don't really want people to know. So there's a time, I think, when we are ready to talk about these things, and there are times when we're not ready yet, but I know it's time. So before we start, I just want to ask, who of you, don't raise your hand yet, has been touched by some form of loss, either recently or before, which can look like something of the following or something that comes up in your heart? Have you experienced the loss, perhaps, of a broken relationship? Maybe the loss of a dream you held on to, something you were really trusting the Lord for and it didn't work out. Maybe lost your job, maybe lost physical things like lost your car, your house, maybe lost a spouse, a child, a loved one. So is there someone who can relate to some type of loss that you have experienced in your life before? You can just raise your hand. Okay. So it is a relevant topic then, eh? Okay. So before I start, I'm just going to give a bit of context. So often I think if we don't understand what is happening with us, it's difficult to have grace for yourself. And often if God reveals something to us, it becomes easier for us to understand what is happening inside of us and with us. So before I share a bit of the story, I just want to create the context and set the stage with how the stages of loss often look like. They don't often just follow each other. Sometimes they start, and then you go back to the start, and then you go back to the start, and then you come to the end, and then you might go back to the start. It's not something that you can move through, and then you're done with it. So, we're going to start. So they're going to give for us a slide there at the back. And our topic, loss and grief. Okay, so when something happens, it's a shock. It's a shock to the system, something that you didn't anticipate or want to happen. And the first phase that we then enter is a coping mechanism called denial. Okay, so that's the first stage. So in this stage, we often have these feelings that are so sudden and intense that we don't quite know how to handle them. So it's better for us just to act as if they don't exist, just for us actually to get time, actually to kind of digest, what is going on. So in this stage, we have this defense mechanism, which for a while just numbs us a bit, just so that we can just, come up for air. And it sounds, example of this would sound like, if you maybe lost your job, you'd say, they'll call me in a week, maybe to come back. It can't be true. Maybe if you got a diagnosis of a terminal illness, joh, baie dankie. Kan jy dit hoor? Ons kan so. Yo, can we give klappies for Gerard, please? Okay, so maybe if you were diagnosed with a terminal illness, your sentence in this denial time would sound like, maybe they did the test wrong. This can't be the verdict. There must be something wrong with them. This can't be it. So in this stage, we're just kind of denying it, and it's just a way to cope so that we can just get to a place where we can start dealing with it. So as the emotions then start arising after we've been numbed for a while, it moves us into the next phase where we experience, not everyone goes through this stage. I just want to just make that clear, this next phase, but many people do. Okay, so the next phase is called the anger phase. Okay, can you relate to that? Like after maybe you had the breakup, and now all of a sudden you realize just what's happened, and you're like angry, because he missed the best thing you could ever have in his life, or how could he not, or whatever. Okay, so the anger phase. Okay, it's often just a masking effect for what is really going on underneath the surface. The anger is not really the problem, it's just our defense mechanism, again, to cope with what is actually going on inside, because we're not ready to feel all of that yet. Okay, so anger hides the pain and the guilt and the bitterness, and often in this stage, we don't want to do it, but we kind of tend to take it out on people around us, often the people that are closest to us. I don't know if you can relate. So it might be, for an example, let's say during this stage, like when you have experienced this loss, everything, and you kind of in this anger, now you in the post office, in the queue, and now you're waiting, and normally you have patience, but here your self-control is gone in this time because of this loss that you're experiencing. So now, when the lady's taking too long, and now when it's eventually your turn, she gets up and she goes and checks her phone first, or whatever, and then you lose it. It's not normally your personality, but you lose it. You freak out, you behave like a vark, you are so ashamed, and you just leave, and the poor letter never gets sent, okay? But that's something that happens often. That's an example of something that can happen in this anger phase. Also, it's normal. It's so normal to ask, God, where are you? Where are you in all of this? I can't see you. I can't feel you. I feel disappointed. How can we be here? So all of this to help us to understand it's all normal. We all go through this. Also, something that also happens often in this anger phase is we are made to want to have to be able to blame someone. It's as if our brain and our heart can't stop until we can pinpoint it to someone or something. So either we might be angry at God, we might be angry at the person, like, why didn't you take better care of yourself? Like my dad, for example, he smoked and he drank too much Coke and 4 to 5 spoons of sugar in his coffee. And then he won't eat the whole day. So he lived on smokes, on Coke and on coffee. So for me back then, I thought maybe if he just took better care of himself, it might have been different now. So I'm angry that he didn't take care of himself. Or sometimes when we've been around and around and we have no one else to blame, we start blaming ourselves. And it's not always rational why we feel that way, but we can't help that it happens. Okay, then we will move on then to the next phase, which is the bargaining phase. So during this phase, we are very aware of our grief and that we are feeling helpless and vulnerable. So we are kind of looking for a way to gain back control of what's happening with our life around us. So during this phase, we will have a lot of things like, if only I could, what if, only if. Our brain will go and play out every scenario that we can to have this situation worked out differently. What if, for example, we took my dad to hospital earlier? What if we didn't let him lay in the normal ward too long before we called someone to see he's actually supposed to go to ICU? What if we play out all the scenarios, and we have to do that. Sometimes it makes other people crazy around us because they need to listen to how our brain is trying to see how we can work this thing out to make it turn out different. But it's just a way we are trying to get a grip, get control of what's happening and what's going on. Often we want to make a deal with God also during this time. So let's say it's a relationship thing and you guys did break up, but you really want this person back. Then you'll be like, okay, God, I promise you, from today going forward, I will pray every single day. I will fast every Monday. If you give me that man, I will do whatever it takes. So we want to bargain, we want to negotiate with the Lord because we so badly want that outcome. I'm so glad that God doesn't keep those promises against us. So I spoke to a friend of mine during the week who also lost her father a few years ago to cancer, and they were really trusting the Lord for a baby back then. And she then said to the Lord, if you spare my dad and you don't take him, I will be okay with it if you never give us a child. But if you just please spare my dad. And today, she has the most beautiful boy, and her dad is not here anymore. And she is so thankful that the Lord didn't keep that on her, but that He knew she was desperate. She was trying to bargain to get the Lord to act and move, but she did not know what she was asking. He's faithful, ne? He's faithful. And He heals her heart still today from what happened with her dad. Okay, so the next phase we then move into is the depression phase. So this is a quiet phase of grief and loss. The other two phases is active and busy, but this one is quiet and isolated. This is where we can't hide anymore behind the anger because our brain is starting to process, okay, this is what happened. It doesn't help me being angry. It doesn't make sense. And we start actually to feel what's going on inside. Kind of in a way embracing it. And it's sometimes a messy phase. We get very foggy and confused. You will put the bread in the freezer and you will put the milk in the cupboard. You might be turning into a one-way on the road. It's not always an easy place to be in. And if people around you are not aware of what you're going through, they will misunderstand many of the things you are doing. So, again, it's important to have grace with yourself. So if you find yourself here, know it's normal and it will pass, but don't be so hard on yourself. Okay, so in this phase, we might often say or feel like, why should I go on? Or is there any purpose for me left anymore? And we have to ask those questions. We have to be there. We have to have that struggle with the Lord because it brings us to a place where we can move closer to restoration, not having things the way they were, because they'll never be the way they were, especially if it's someone you lost, or a divorce, or a terminal illness, or losing a limb, or whatever. Your life is never the same again. Okay, so then we move into the next phase, the acceptance phase. And this is not necessarily a happy phase. It doesn't mean that you have moved on or moved past your grief. It just means that you've come to a place where you're starting to accept it, and you're coming to understand what has happened with your life, and that your new normal is a new normal. The old normal doesn't exist anymore. And you kind of come to terms with it. You also, during this phase, start getting more good days than bad days. So often people think you move through this and you get to acceptance, and then nothing touches or hurts your heart anymore. But it's not like that. It's just the spaces in between where you can come up for air become more, and you can breathe a bit more often. When you think about the hurt, when you miss the person, or you experience the loss, you still feel the same amount of intense grief like the first day. It just doesn't last that long before you can come up for air anymore. Okay, is it something you guys can relate to? Okay, so that's just the context, just to put a bit background on how the stages of loss work. So I think it's just good to understand. Sometimes we're in there and we think we're going to be stuck somewhere, but it's good to know whatever we're going through, it is normal. It's not something that's not happening to other people as well, and that it will change, a new change. Okay. Do tonight with a few low points, but I can stand here and I can still say that God is good and that He is faithful. And like I said in the beginning, He kept chasing me down, even when I didn't want it to be chased down, or even when I knew I needed to be chased down, He still showed up. Okay, so a few years ago, we were still staying in Pretoria, and we had a business. And due to certain things that were out of our control, the business went under. So in the beginning, it's difficult to know when something is over. Like, sometimes you think, okay, we should just have faith. Let's have faith. We put this in place, because next month, everything's going to turn out. It'll be better. And then next month comes, and then it's just... And then it's like, no, we pray and we fast and we seek the Lord, and we really intercede and we trust the Lord. We're having faith. And then the next month, so that's how it went. So every time we thought it was going to go better, and it just didn't. So eventually it came to a place where we as a family, we all moved into one house. And I think luckily we all knew that to make this work, we need to compromise and give space to one another. We can't be selfish, and I think we were all in a tight spot, and we were all there together, so we knew we needed to make it work. So I don't think all families will survive doing that, but luckily we did. We've done it a few times. But anyway, but after that, we then moved to a neighborhood where I grew up. If you stayed on that side of the mountain at that neighborhood, it means you're poor. So for me, I never in my life wanted to stay there. And I never realized how much pride I had until this journey started. So if someone from high school or wherever, they'll ask where we stay, and then I'm like, Mountain View. I just say, or I'll say, no, Pretoria West somewhere. I just don't want them to know. But what does it matter? No? But anyway, while we were staying there, it was really a tough time financially. So we didn't have income, and me and Sydney, we went back to full-time ministry, but there was no guarantee of R1 coming into our bank at the end of the month. And it was an up and down period. God was faithful in so many ways, but I felt very ashamed during that time. So the only reason, for example, why we weren't put out of the place where we stayed is because the property belonged to the church, and they excused us for being late on rent. But then it's like 1 month, and I'm like, please God, 2 months, and I don't know what to say anymore, and I don't know where the money's going to come from. 3 months, and then miraculously God will supply. But during those 3 months until getting there, I was often so ashamed of my character, of what came out. Because I so badly wanted to have faith and keep a good, but it didn't happen that way. I think because it went on for long. I think that's the thing. If it's a month or 2 or 3, but when it gets to years, it's just kind of enough. So, but anyway, during that time, me and Sydney, if we got income of any form, we still tithed. So then I'm like pleading with the Lord. I'm asking, so we are tithing, but why aren't we seeing any fruit? Why is our fridge empty? Why is it necessary that I must feel so angry and disappointed at God not providing for us until where it's the last packet of meat and there are other people coming to eat with us? I don't even know if it's enough food for all of us, and then there's nothing. And I just hated being there over and over and over. And then, so God knew if I could let the principal work without him, maybe I would have relied on the principal and not on him. So we need to serve the God of the principles, not the principles in themselves. Yeah, so that's what I took from that time. But that day, I remember I went to the garden and I said, through all this time, when I look at other people, I know that God is still good. And I know He's the provider, and I know He loves them. I can look at someone and I can experience that so intensely in my heart, but I can't experience that for myself anymore. So I said to God, the one thing that I do, I can't believe that He loves me anymore. I can't believe that He provides. I can't believe that He sees us or that He carries us through. But the one thing that never changed was that I believed that He existed. That's the one thing that remained. And for that I was thankful. But I was so ashamed for coming to a place of experiencing that and telling that to God. I was so ashamed of that. And that evening, someone came and they knocked on our door and they filled our fridge with so much meat. And then I was even more ashamed and just crying. But God is faithful, even when we are not, even when we cannot see, even when we cannot hold on, He still is faithful. So during that time, disappointment was written quite big over that phase of our life. And also during that time, my older sister, they've been trusting the Lord for a baby for many years, 6 years by then. They went for many treatments, and after 6 years, they eventually fell pregnant. And we were so excited for them. And she was she had a high-risk pregnancy, so every 2 weeks she needs to go to the doctor. So I went with her every time. And then this one time, we were walking up the steps and I could feel the Holy Spirit. I was amazed that He actually talked to me and I could hear Him. I think He's always talking. I was not in a place to really listen. But I could hear Him speak in my spirit that today things are not going to be the same. So we went in. I was sitting in the waiting room and she went in to see the doctor. And when she came out, she went directly to the receptionist. And she was crying. She couldn't control herself. So I knew something's not right. And we walked down to the car, and we got into the car, and I asked her if I can pray for her. Can I pray for her baby? Because the God that we serve is the healer. It doesn't matter how I feel or what I'm going through. I know that is the truth. So I asked her, can I put my hands on your baby and just pray for him or her? And we prayed, and we didn't know if anything happened. And then I asked her, before you go do the scrape, just ask them to test one more time if there's no heartbeat. And she went, and then eventually there was no heartbeat. So the baby passed away. And I remember that Sunday. Now everything goes on when you experience loss. You must know, ne? Life just goes on. You are dying inside, but everything else is just normal. Your life stands still, but nothing else stands still. And so I still had to be part of the worship, and I was standing behind the a keyboard, and I could experience how God asked me, will I still serve him even if he doesn't do what I ask? And it was such a hard question, but my heart didn't take long to say yes. Because even though I did not experience him during this time, there's been so many times where he was so tangibly faithful, touching my heart, healing me, doing things that I cannot deny that he exists in Israel. So I said, yes, I will, but written all over was disappointment. So eventually we moved to Cape Town, which was an amazing decision. Then me and Sydney were very reluctant. We went to a Pentecostal tent service, and it was on fire for the Messiah. Everyone's clapping, jumping, and my parents and them, they decided they were going to move this side, and me and Sydney said, no, we're not going to come with. But during that service, when we left the tent, me and Sydney looked at each other, and we knew we had to go. Not even saying a word. I don't know how it was on his mind and my mind, but it's the Holy Spirit that speaks. So in 2 weeks' time, we got new tenants for the place we stayed. We packed our house, we moved to Cape Town, and a new journey started. So we moved this side to continue the ministry team which we were part of. So the name was Zoe Academy, and we did dance and drama and music and spread the gospel through the arts. So eventually we were very excited and we got everything together, but soon we realized something is not as it seems. It's not falling into place, and we're not quite sure why. So again, the finances were drying up. We had to eventually sell all our equipment and stuff in the house just to stay afloat. But God took care of us, but once again it was tough. There's no 20 rand to buy you no crop top at Mr. Price, you understand? There's nothing. It's for food, and if you list for a chocolate, then you list for a chocolate. It's going to stay there. You don't even ask because it's not going to happen, you know. So it was still a tough time. During that time in May, it was 2015 May, I got a phone call where my parents phoned, my parents, so Sydney's parents moved with us to Cape Town, my parents in Port Edward, and they said, no, they diagnosed my dad with cancer. So it was quite a shock at first, but because of the history, that's why I had to include the history, because otherwise this time wouldn't have made sense. But so having disappointment on disappointment on disappointment, but still trusting God to bring an outcome, it was a difficult time. There was then a day, I was 30 on that day, and I stood in front of the mirror, and for the first time I realized how many gray hairs I've got. And I think it's because of all the worry of that time, but it's the first time that I saw or noticed them. I'm sure they've been there for longer. I didn't look properly. It's difficult if you wear contacts. You don't always, you can't always make it work. But anyway, but I remember that time. During that time, I was not accustomed to the sun coming up after 12 noon in Cape Town, in winter. But so I just remember during that time I just slept. In the mornings I just slept till 11 o'clock, 12 o'clock. I didn't want to get up anymore. And it was so difficult. God spoke. Even in that time He spoke. But it was so difficult that there were no results. So it's promises and God speaks and I can feel how He's feeding my spirit, but nothing is changing in the physical. Nothing. There's no doors opening. So this one night I was listening to Kim Walker's testimony. It was like an old testimony of her. And I was just sitting on the bed and I listened to it. And at the end, she quoted the scripture, 1 John 3:20, where it says, "Whenever our hearts convict us in guilt, for God is greater than our hearts and knows all things. Nothing is hidden from Him because we are in His hand." And I've come to a place where I felt so guilty for being so disappointed in God that I felt ashamed to feel that way. But I knew I couldn't lie to God because, you see, He can anyway see what's going on in here. So I can't fool Him. So I just might as well just be honest with Him and tell Him. And then He gave me this verse where I can come to understand that when my heart convicts me of guilt, that He is greater than what is going on in my heart, and that He knows all things, that nothing is hidden from Him because we are in His hand. I'm still in His hand. And that just liberated me so much, how God can speak so deeply into your heart, into what's so sore and hurting inside. And in one moment, He can touch it with His truth, but in grace and so much love. Not saying, "You have been unfaithful in how you've trusted me. You have not been praying enough. You're not standing on your promises enough." Nothing of that. There's no condemnation. All He's doing was reaching out in love. And He's always doing that. It's just, are we open to feel it and to take it? So then me and Sydney realized, okay, we need to get a job because we can't keep selling everything because there's not going to be anything left to sell. And then I had to apply for jobs, but I was especially angry at God because He sent us to Cape Town for this dream of Zoe. And now it's not happening. Now I need to go and get a job. But He sent us for Zoe, for this ministry, to change people's lives. Now, what must I apply to become a au pair? I don't know. I've never had a real job in my life. I was a photographer before, but I had to sell all of the equipment. So I can't take no pictures here. We need to sell everything. But anyway, and then we came to visit KLC because my dad knew Pastor Dave and Pastor Sean for many years, and there was a board outside where they had a plan for also kind of a service year thing, which had a video department and a business school department. And so we asked to talk to that lady of the business school department because we wanted to include that in our Zoe ministry curriculum. And we met that lady a few times. And then at the end of one meeting, after me really struggling to send an email to apply for an au pair, they were just lying in the drafts. I just had to press send, but I couldn't get myself to do that because how can God not be faithful to the promise? And at the end of that meeting, the lady Hester, she looked at us and she said she knows it's not an appropriate thing to ask because we want to make her think a part of our things. We have things to do here, but she really needs someone to come and help her in her office. And she does not know that I was so angry and fighting with God for having to give up everything that is so dear to us. And in the end, so thank you. I prayed so hard that God would help me not to cry tonight. It didn't work. But anyway, So she asked if I don't want to come and help her in the office for a while. But we stay in southern suburbs, they stay in Strand. We don't have a car anymore. We lost everything. So I don't know how we're going to get here, how we're going to be able to afford to stay here. And in the end, she says, we know you don't have a car, and we know you don't have a place to stay, but we have a flat next to our house. And if you want to, you guys can come and stay there for 6 months. You don't need to pay any rent. You don't need to bring anything with except your clothes. And I was like, that's how faithful God is. No, He's faithful. So eventually God moved us from Mountain View, where I was so afraid people would know where I was staying, to a place where we stay in a golf estate there at Hester's house, where I could eat my Kellogg's on the beach each morning, just because I can, and I'm from Transvaal. Who can eat their Kellogg's on the beach, It's such a privilege. And slowly but surely, God started helping us to get back onto our feet. But we needed someone to give us a chance. And sometimes we all just need that someone that will say, I'm willing to take a chance on you. And if it is in your means to give a chance to someone, when God speaks, be open, because He can do it through a rock and make Balaam's donkey speak, but He chooses to use us. That is His first choice of tool, is us to be His hands and His feet. So be open to be used. Okay, so something that Pastor Sean then mentioned in church during that time, we eventually started coming to church here, and they say their church has the prophetic word where people often who come from ministry will come and rest in the branches and will become healed, will receive healing in their time here. And that is really something that we experienced. We're still here. We haven't flown away. Some people fly, but we're still here. But Pastor Sean said something during that time that really helped me to understand what happened to me during all that time of disappointment. He said, there's a difference sometimes in terms of trust and belief. So he used the analogy of a guy who is walking on a tightrope between a canyon. And then he goes and he takes a wheelbarrow and he walks. Oh, before he goes, sorry, I must get the story straight. He's asking, do you believe I can take this wheelbarrow across? Then the people says, yes, we believe. And then he goes with the wheelbarrow over the canyon, and he comes back and the people goes crazy. And then he says, okay, do you believe I can put a pig inside the wheelbarrow and take it with? And the people says, yeah. And then the pig, and then he goes with the pig and the wheelbarrow, and he comes back. And then in the end, he asks, do you believe that I can take one of you? And then it sounded like this. Creak, creak, no one wants to be the guinea pig for that trip. And I realized that is what happened to me. Before all of this disappointment, even though my personality wants things to be secure, I want to know where I'm going. I choose the stable thing. I experienced God so much when I was young in so many ways that it gave me boldness to recklessly follow Him. And in this time, I got disappointed, I got hurt, to a point where I believed that God can do many things, but I couldn't trust Him anymore to get into the wheelbarrow. And when He said that, it just brought everything into perspective. So that's when God brings revelation, and He talks again right in there where no one can touch. And He knows what we need to hear to bring that change and to bring a light bulb that goes on. He's so faithful. I also realized in that time that I had to come to a place where I needed to forgive God. And this one time we had the delight session, and I was just actually so normal about it. We were talking about forgiving others, forgiving yourself. And I said, yes, and we should also touch forgiving God. And I'm like seeing they not responding quite back, and I'm not understanding why. And so I'm like, have you never felt like you needed to forgive God? And they're all like, no. And I'm like, I felt so much shame that I've been there so many times, that I was so angry at God that I actually needed to forgive him. Not because he did anything wrong, not because he deserves my forgiveness, not at all, but for me to let it go. Because I don't understand and I only see in part. It's not for him, it's for me to be free. So that was something that also had to happen during that time. And God also put me in a waiting room. Nathaniel talked about a waiting room. He put me in an office with a lady who loves God so much, who was such a big mentor to me, that every day while we were just busy talking, doing office work, seeing her operate, God started restoring my heart, and also helping me to learn from her. And she understood me very well, and she also helped me to understand what was happening with my life and where actually should I be going. So slowly but surely I started coming alive again. And then in 2016 October, my dad passed away from cancer. So during that time, we were in Port Edward, in Natal, and I realized my dad's not doing too well. But when it happens, it's near the end. You never know it's the end. You're not aware that this is now it. So I just looked at my dad, and I knew if my other siblings were to see him like this, I would have wanted them to phone me to come. I'm not saying something's going to happen, but I just would have wanted to be there. So I phoned all my siblings, and they came. They all got off. All our spouses, everyone, we came. So we never knew it would have been the last week we had with him. He went in for a chemo port and for a colonoscopy bag. So he was not at the end. He just went in to get a procedure. But because he was a smoker, he could not smoke during that time. So I think his body was at his weakest, and he had to battle the withdrawal symptoms, It's, and then we didn't want to encourage him to smoke, so we were actually relieved that he's now just having to leave it now. But then the one doctor said, but what you're doing is not helping him. He needs to smoke. If he can go out and smoke, just let him go. And then I realized maybe we're not really sure what's going on. So soon after that, they moved him to the ICU, and I just remember something that was a big struggle for me was knowing when to stop fighting in prayer and in the Spirit and fighting for what I want, and to let go and rest in what God is busy doing, and to lean back and trust in it and just be there. So every time I was at hospital, I would like, be praying. If I go home, I pray. Then I feel so guilty because I can't pray all night through, because my prayers of going all night through is the only thing that's going to save my dad. And I felt so guilty not doing it, as if my prayers could be the only thing. If God decides, But anyway, that's how you think. Because you want to bargain with the Lord, just because you are so desperate that you'll do anything to have the outcome. So in that time, the one day, then I'm like, Dad, come on, Dad, you must just keep fighting. We're going to win this thing. And I'm seeing him going away slowly. And there was this sister who came, and she just said, do you want what's best for you, or do you want what's best for him? And I realized then that I'm so busy with what I want and fighting that I'm missing being there in the last moments with him. And so that is my advice to you, is if you get to that place, just be there. God can do whatever he wants, and if you ask him, he'll do. And if he doesn't, you need to rest in that. And you fighting in your mind this battle is not going to make him move. Just because he loves you, and if that is what needs to happen, he will. And if it doesn't, he'll still carry you. So that's what I can say during that time. Through all of the disappointment that happened prior, during this time, we were so aware of God's presence. From when we got there, every time we went to the hospital, the car guard encourages us with word, as if he knows what we're going through. There's many people in that hospital. Not all of them are terminally ill. He doesn't know I'm there because my father's dying, but he encourages us, the car guard. Then we get to the admin staff. My mom, she doesn't like admin. She gets so stressed out and tense, and then the lady at the admin is so compassionate and so patient with her. And then the staff and everyone, we were just so aware of God's presence. We could not deny it. It was almost tangible in a way, like he was just carrying us. And the last day, we were all with him when he gave his last breath. And God is so faithful that we could have been there. And I'm told today how God has carried our family through all of that. And I know that. How much time do we have left, Pastor Sean? I'm talking so much. Okay. So the one thing that happened from here was I never realized that I didn't really deal with my father's passing. So I'm a do type of person, and I don't dwell too much on things usually in my head. If I'm busy enough, I don't overthink everything. I just do whatever is before me. I just go. And what happens? I just want to come back to this. When you injure your body somewhere, sometimes all the muscles and the tendons and the ligaments around that area, they draw stiff. They want to protect that area, so they become hard around it. So we often have patterns for things, and if we become aware of them, we can do something about them. So I have a pattern of when I get hurt, I shut myself off, I close my heart. And it's not something that I consciously do. I only realize after a while when I am dead. I feel so dead, I feel so numb, I just feel nothing, that I've been doing it. And so this is what I started doing again without realizing. And I couldn't cry. I think also I felt like I had to be strong for my family, but I couldn't feel anything. I wasn't angry at God at all, because he was so present and he was so gracious to not let my dad suffer. I was so relieved that he put him out of his pain. So I was not angry at him, but I couldn't feel him. And I just started like running, not physically, but I started working longer hours and harder and harder, and trying to so badly control everything. Like we said, going through those phases. You get a phase that you so desperately just want to control something, because everything else is feeling like it's falling apart. But if I can just at least control something, it feels like I have control over something. And so eventually I was really burnt out, and it was very difficult for me to come to church then. To be in God's presence, you have to be vulnerable, and I wasn't ready. I didn't want to fall apart. I didn't know what was going to come out, so I just avoided his presence and his intimacy. And I also struggled to read Bible, really, like for 2 years. I couldn't read Bible. If I read, it's just dead. But I read, I tried, but nothing happened. It was just dead. And eventually, I talked to God a lot. That I just did. Eventually, we got an opportunity to go to Sierra Leone, and sometimes we think a change is as good as a holiday. You think then you're away from all your problems. And so we went to Sierra Leone, and in the beginning I was so excited because it's Africa, red ground, people to minister to. I was just so excited. I love Africa. And in the beginning, the excitement, it like you can feel something, because when you numb inside, you don't just numb the bad, you numb the good. That's why you feel nothing. You don't feel excited, you don't feel beautiful things just as much as you don't feel anything else. So for the first time again, I felt alive, hopeful that things will change. And then we got there. And as soon as we got settled in and my old patterns start coming back, trying to be a perfectionist on everything, trying to control everything, working too hard, just working. I had to realize I can't get away from what was going on here. It just follows you. So if you don't deal with whatever's going on, don't go into something new, because it's just gonna, as soon as all the in love wears off, as soon as the joy of the new car wears off, as soon as you're still left with yourself and your old junk if you don't deal with it. And so during that time in Sierra Leone, I had to realize I had such a big fear of going back to our past, of not having finances. I had to realize that I've not really I didn't realize then it was because of my father's death that I was not coping because of that, but I just realized I was not okay. And I also realized I didn't like the person I was anymore. And I didn't want to be me. I didn't want to be with me. I didn't want to be anywhere else. I just didn't want to be anymore. And also during that time, I was so often so awful to my husband, because if you hurt, you need to get it out, so you take it out on the people you love the most. And one day I just felt how God said, why do I keep on treating him the way I do if he's the person I love the most? And why do I think that I can say anything in any way and he will never get to a point where I hurt him so much that he will leave? So why do I keep pushing him as if he will never leave? That I don't need to count my words or consider what I do or say, because he will just always forgive me. And I really tried, but I was still so broken that I couldn't get it right. But I was so aware of not doing well. So in the end, I couldn't stop on this running thing that I was, and my body started giving in, and I had to go for operation. And I remember the night before the operation, it was so busy with work because I had to hand over everything that I didn't really even have time to realize what I'm getting myself into. So it's like the night before, and I'm like, what am I doing? Am I going for this operation? I don't know. I feel so afraid, and I haven't prayed. It was so traveling and having to give over the work. I haven't prayed or spent time with the Lord. And in a moment, I haven't even heard that song for how many months, I hear, "You've never failed me yet." And that's all I had. So I held on to that going into the operation. And Sydney so often asked me to rather resign because he could see that I'm not coping and it's not a good space to be in, but I couldn't stop. I didn't know how. And I didn't want to laat iemand in die steek, disappoint the people I worked with. And so in the end, eventually, if you want something to change, you need to make a decision. It won't change by itself. So in the end, we decided we want to start with the family. We want a less pressured life and stressed life. And so I'm rather going to resign. And so that we can start with the family. And so that's what we decided. And but again, I was at a place of so much burnout, and physically my body was not doing well. So after that, I'm almost at the end, don't worry. No, nog baie blats. Okay. No, okay. I'll crash land somewhere. Okay. So then also my sister got diagnosed with a tumor, and I shared this with Nono the other night, the other day, and that was again a big setback for me. In the beginning, I could stand on the word, and I started, to do what I'm supposed to do in the spirit. But eventually, when the results took so long to come, I was just I couldn't hold it together. I was just so afraid for her to die. I was actually making plans like, should we move back to Pretoria so that we can be there to support them? I didn't know quite what to do. And I was, again, not trying to think about it. I just didn't want to feel anything, so I'm just like brain dead. And I'm driving the car. It was on a Saturday, and I'm not even doing anything spiritual, not even thinking about God. And in a moment, I experienced how He gave me peace and how He said, my sister will be fine. In a moment, He is so faithful that the reckless love of God, how He chases us down. It chases us down, and He comes and He meets us right there where we are at. Even when we can't be in a better place, right there in our junk, and in our disbelief, and in our shame, and in our feeling guilty for not being able to trust Him, He comes and He gives peace. Not because I deserve it, but because He is faithful. He is faithful. Yes, I wanted to share the scripture, 2 Timothy 2:13. If we are faithless, He remains faithful, for He cannot deny Himself. God is faithful. So eventually in 2020, I had to come to a place where God solemnly told me I'm not over my dad's death, and I need to face it. And during that time, I felt like I was getting a lot of anxiety. So before, when people said stuff like this, I'd think, "Oh, you weak. Get your head right. What anxiety? Don't let it overcome you." It's what I couldn't identify with it. But so what started happening was I'd wake up on a Thursday morning waking up, oh, I have band practice tonight. Band practice. Something I've done, closed eyes 200 times in my life. And I will start to feel so anxious that my whole body goes numb and I can't move. I'm lying there in bed and I'm feeling. And then I realized all of this stuff that has been pressed down, it needs to come out somewhere. All that emotions, all those stuff that I suppressed. So I said, okay, body, manifest. Do whatever you want. Go numb. Do, it's fine. Just feel something. I know you need to feel something. So feel your anxiety. Feel what you want to feel. But I want to come and remind you what is the truth. And it was as if God helped me to switch my mind, even though my body wasn't responding yet. And He gave me that scripture, 2 Timothy 1:7. God has not given me a spirit of fear, but of power, of love, and a sound mind. And then for 60 days, I kept reciting that verse every morning so that I could just have courage to go through the day. And if I felt overwhelmed, like not coming to band practice, I chose to still come. Even though it was so difficult to get myself here and to sit in front of the piano. But God is faithful. And so we can't let our emotions keep dictating what we do. We need to feel them, acknowledge them, but don't feed them. And then remind them what is the truth. Because we can't keep suppressing them, because that was what I was doing. I was just shoving it down. So something else that was beautiful in that time, I went to visit a friend. It was in lockdown, and she was staying with people, and the situation was quite hopeless where she stayed. They didn't have finances. They weren't welcome where they stayed. She's the only person who loves God. And during that time, I watched The Chosen. And I was on my way there the morning, and I felt, yes, God, I don't know how I'm going to do this. I need to give her hope, but I'm so overwhelmed. I don't know how a situation is going to change. And in that moment, again, God starts talking. He says, I'm trying to fit God into the box of my limited disappointments, which I have experienced. But He doesn't fit in there. He's so big, but I've reduced Him to be a small God because I didn't want to be disappointed anymore. So if I lower my expectations, I'm not going to be disappointed over and over. So this day, I see like I watched last night, Jesus sitting there talking to the lady at the well. And in my spirit, I understood, if Jesus were to be here standing right next to me and going with me into that house and praying for that family, everything would change. And it's like I knew that inside of me. I started feeling the truth again, like stirring courage So I said, okay, God, today I'm not going to this family with a defeated God, because I have reduced you to be a defeated God. I'm going there with you, and I don't need to move. I don't need to make everything move. You are there. You are there with me. So if Jesus was there and you would go in, everything would be different. He is there. He's in me. He's going with. So it has to change. And I didn't try so hard to make things change. I just prayed with her. And what God did was, in that time, she could not come to church. And He sustained her spiritually for such a long time. Changing her heart and her mind towards the people in that house, to love on them, not to constantly be fighting with them and trying to convince them of the truth, just to love them and to serve them. And that's only something that He could do, because out of myself, I couldn't change anything. So stuff like that started happening. And so this year, my father-in-law also got sick, and they found something in his prostate. At first, they wanted to do the studies and everything, and the first time they told us, immediately, like, everything from the past starts talking loud. Like, because that's what happened when my sister also got the thing in her thyroid. If I need to take the history, then it's not a good sign. If that speaks loudest, it will kill my mind again with all those negative things. And luckily, this was not the first time me being there. And I realized I can't suppress when I'm feeling. I feel afraid for my father. I'm so afraid it's going to be a malignant cancer, and then it's going to change his life, and then he's not going to be here. And I remember that morning, I said, okay, I give myself one jog, one round, running around where we stay. And in that half an hour, I can cry and I can be fearful. And my heart can go to all the scenarios, but when that jogging round is done, then it's done. Then I'm going to stand on the word. And God has been so faithful, because it's Him that helps us. And through this all, I was so aware not to do the same thing again. But it's still so hard. And it was this year my father-in-law, did pass away. And it was in July this year. But God is still good. And that's why I realized we need to share, because my family is hurting. And if we don't talk about it, we can't help each other if we keep quiet about all these things. But something that was so wonderful is, this time I was present while my dad was there his last days. I wasn't fighting in my head like the previous time. I didn't try to force what I wanted to. I was just there, and I just observed. And the last few times I was with him, I appreciated it. And for the rest of the time, I tried to support my family. But God is still faithful, and He still carries us through. I just want to give then I'm really done, just give a few last tips. For if you are someone who tries to support someone that's going through some type of loss, when the loss occurs, it's not easy, but you kind of have something to say. You say, I'm sorry for your loss. I'm sorry for your parents passing away, and I'm praying for you. But the second time you see them, you don't quite know what to say, because you've already said you're sorry for the loss. Now it's like usually you would say, how are you? But how dumb does it feel to ask that? So you don't quite know what to ask. So what in the end happens is you avoid the person. And that is the one thing that we don't need during this time, is people avoiding us. In the beginning, when it's the anger phase and the shock phase and the denial phase, yes, ignore us then. But when it gets to the bargaining, and when we need to talk it out, we need to go about all the scenarios with someone. Because if we have to do it in our head with ourselves all the time, it's very lonely. And when it gets to the depression stage, you need someone who says, come, let's go jog. Let's just jog. You don't need to talk about the issue. But sometimes we need people who are bold, who says, how is it going with you, with your dad that's not here? How are you feeling today about that? And in that time, it's often you don't want it from the people closest to you because you can shut them out. You don't need to talk. No matter how hard Sydney tried, I didn't open up to him, even if he tried. But during that time, I had one friend, only one, who by the name asked me, how are you with your dad? And I know a lot of people. We all know a lot of people. One person. So we need to talk. And if you don't poke into our hurt, we won't. So be brave. And even if they lash out, even if the anger phase just maybe repeats or opens up again, have compassion and patience and grace for them. But don't stop trying. Okay, so... And also when you bring it into the light, it loses its power. Sometimes some of the things you are believing, which is not the truth, when it gets out of your mouth and you hear it, it kind of gets disarmed by God's truth and talking with a friend who loves God. Okay, so after all the dust has settled and the burial has happened and everything, and like I say, the anger phase has subsided, then more than ever, you actually first need someone. So check in on those people during that time. Okay, and then for the person who's experiencing the loss, I think it's good just to identify where you are sometimes, and then, like I said before, just to have grace with yourself. Also, you're not always prepared when your emotions will come out and in which way. Like I said, I just felt numb the whole time, but I remember once standing in the Pick and Pay queue, and then the guy in front of me, his cigarettes smells like my dad's cigarettes, and I just couldn't keep myself together. Now I needed to pay, but I was just falling apart. So sometimes we can't always help. We don't know what's going to be the trigger to open up Pandora's box, and we're not sure what's going to come out. And also maybe sometimes just be sensitive to the leading of the Holy Spirit, because sometimes we're annoyed with someone in a queue or on the road, and they might actually be going through this now. So be sensitive for that. Also, identify destructive patterns if you have them. For me, when I get under a lot of stress, what I do is I tend to watch TV too late, staying up later and later each night, later, and none of that nonsense that I'm looking or watching is actually imparting something good. I'm just watching it so that I can zone out and not be there. And that's what I tend to do, and then I sleep less and less and less. I'm more tired than before. And then I start going down. I don't eat well. I can't sleep anymore. So now I can identify the pattern. So now I choose not to go and watch TV too late. I go and read a book. And I go when my husband goes to bed, I go with him and I read a book until I fall asleep. But I can identify it now. Before I didn't realize that was what I was doing. Sometimes after a loss or a hurt, even with a relationship or a job, or it's often so tough, the hurt, that we are not open, or we are actually afraid to be happy again or to trust the Lord for something like that again, because maybe we will just lose it again in the end. But we can't live like that in fear. That's not what the Lord wants for us. That's stealing, that's robbing. Gratitude is also something that helps during that time to get out of that hole of depression. Exercise and gratitude. Exercise physically and exercise to be grateful. And a practical thing, try to write down 5 things you are thankful for each day, but you can't repeat anything you wrote the day before, anything you've ever mentioned. So that's something that can practice to help you get out of looking inward and to just look outward. And then that helps to eventually look back up to God again. Just want to see if there's something else. In the end, God is the only healer. There's no other. There is no other. There's no drug, no alcohol, no lover, there's nothing that can bring restoration to your heart. All those other things, they just numb whatever's going on here. He is the only healer. And if we don't allow Him to heal us, we keep struggling with those things. But He will always keep crying out. And He speaks in a way which He knows we will hear. Something that I also just want to share this, and then I'm going to end off. During that time, before I felt God for the first time again, I remember one morning coming to church, and I said to God, I miss normal. Like nothing is normal anymore. Like I don't have one moment of an experience of normal. It's different. And I missed the familiarity of something normal, and I missed His familiarity of being close because I couldn't feel Him anymore. Not anything wow, and I just missed His presence, the familiarity of His presence. And I came into church, and the band was doing, it was Peter's turn, and God speaks in a way that we can hear Him and that He will touch our hearts if we are open to listen. And they did a song that day. It was the words, I think from the chorus says, your name is like honey on my lips, your spirit's like water to my soul, your word is a lamp unto my feet, Jesus, I love you. And that song just spoke into my spirit and into my heart, because in a moment I could feel God's familiarity. Because when I got saved, we sang that song so much at youth that in a moment He took me back to feeling the familiarity of His presence in an old familiar song that just spoke into my spirit that none of my defenses could have kept away. He is so faithful. And God's nature is love, and He loves us. And we cannot we can't always feel or see it, but He is never ever changing. He's the same yesterday, today, and tomorrow. He's the only one in who we can count, on who we can rely, an anchor for our souls. And His nature is love. He loves us in everything that He does. So I had to allow God to come and repair the picture that I had of His nature, which was for a long time that I could not trust Him, to a place again where I can trust whatever He says. And God sees us. He stands still before us. And I want to end with this last part. We were at a spa a while ago. Me and Sydney took me for my birthday. And there was a girl who massaged me. And whilst she was massaging me, we weren't talking. But I said to God while lying there, is there something He wants me to talk to her as message? Does He want me to share something with her, and that He would lay it on my heart? So while I was lying there, I'm like seeing these chicks, like same age, all in a tree. And then I see one falling out, and then I see him lying on his back with his eye like a cross. So like he's dead. And I'm like, oh man, all this stuff of death is so in my head. I even see this when I need to pray for this girl for something, but nothing else comes. And I'm like, okay, God, yes, I'm going to sound so stupid. But in the end, after she's finished, I said, I just want to ask her something. It might be strange, but has she experienced some type of loss? Has she lost someone recently? And then she said 3 months ago, her brother passed away. So the chicks were all the same age, so a sibling. And it was a sibling. So in the end, God speaks and He sees us. And the one thing He wanted to speak to that girl about was the thing that was the most painful for her. to make her realize that He sees, and He's so aware of her pain, of what she's going through, and He's there. He's there. And I want to leave you with this. No matter what you're going through and where you are in your journeys and what losses you have experienced, may you just become aware of His presence and that He is there, that He sees you. He says, I'm El Roi, the God who sees. And He's Emmanuel, the God with us, faithful. So no matter what we go through, we are not alone. And He is able and willing to bring restoration if we allow Him to. So thank you.